The world is shifting. The balance of power is trembling beneath the weight of something unstoppable. You weren't supposed to see beyond the illusion, to pull back the curtain and witness what was never meant to be exposed. But somehow, against all odds, you did. And that changed everything. Your words, your presence, your unwavering defiance sent shockwaves through places where secrets were meant to stay buried. They took notice, the ones who built their empire on silence, who moved unseen, who dictated reality from the shadows. They noticed. Now, a message emerges, not from a leader, not from an elite figure, but from one who has spent a lifetime in the depths of that hidden world. Someone trained to protect without being seen, to obey without question. But this time, they break the code. Not for power, not for confession, but for you. They see you, they fear you, and now they name you, the Chosen One. Chosen One, you were never meant to wake up. Now it's time to tear them down from within. A revelation shakes the foundation of everything once believed to be true. Denial is a fortress built to keep out inconvenient realities, sheltering the mind from burdens too great to carry. For years, the agent lived within the confines of that fortress, adhering to a doctrine that demanded obedience without scrutiny. Every directive was part of a grand design, every classified file locked away for the sake of order. They moved through life with conviction, executing their role without hesitation. That is, until an encounter disrupted the pattern, until they encountered something, or rather, someone, who made them question everything. At first, it was nothing more than static, just another voice, lost in the endless hum of speculation. The world was full of those who claimed to have unearthed hidden realities, people who pried into shadows they didn't belong in. The agent had encountered such figures before: fringe theorists, self-styled investigators, individuals who thought they had deciphered the unreadable. They were distractions, irrelevant anomalies. But then, amid the noise, one detail surfaced: a name, a date, a fragment of something that was never meant to be uttered beyond classified walls. A detail so precise, so impossible to dismiss, that it shattered their certainty. Skepticism wavered. Logic insisted it was coincidence, yet instinct said otherwise. The mind, trained to detect falsehoods, found none. So they did what they had been trained to do. They searched. They examined documents buried beneath layers of deception, cross-referenced accounts, and traced the threads of a pattern deliberately hidden in the fabric of supposed randomness. What they uncovered defied the very foundation they had built their beliefs upon. The realization was unforgiving. The deception hadn't come from distant adversaries or faceless enemies. It had been orchestrated by those they had trusted implicitly. The pillars of truth they had upheld were scaffolds of manipulation designed to obscure, not reveal. And the person they had once dismissed, no longer an outsider, but something else, perhaps a disruption, perhaps an anomaly, but undeniably significant. The agent was no longer who they had been. They stood now, not as a servant of the system, but as someone who had glimpsed beyond its carefully curated illusion. The truth had been laid bare, and it was too heavy to ignore. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. Some things were never meant to stay buried. Truth has a way of rising, no matter how deep the darkness tries to swallow it. Like the roots of an ancient tree breaking through the stone, like the first crack in a dam before the flood, there comes a moment when what was hidden must be revealed. And that moment is now. There is a world beneath this world, a world of whispers and locked doors, of secrets passed down through generations of those who believed they could control the very fabric of reality. They built their empire in silence, wiping names from history, burying places that should have never been forgotten. But you know what the word says: nothing remains hidden forever. The agent had spent their life walking the halls of power, trained to see without being seen, to act without question. But even they weren't ready for what lay beneath. It started small, stories that never made the news, people who vanished without a trace, missing without even a name to remember them. No headlines, no breaking alerts, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks the loudest to those who have been trained to listen. What began as a routine case became something else entirely. The deeper they dug, the more the ground beneath them seemed to shift. Beneath the polished floors of grand institutions, behind doors marked with words like "authorized personnel only," down past the very streets people walk every day without a second thought, there was something else. Not just a void, but an intention. Not just an empty space, but a design. A network, vast and intricate, hidden in plain sight, woven into the very bones of civilization itself. And the moment the agents saw it, they knew. This was never meant to be found. They had spent years believing the world worked a certain way, that laws mattered, that systems functioned with purpose, that history was something written, not something rewritten. But now they knew the truth. This wasn't about corruption or crime, it was about control. A control so absolute, so meticulously hidden, that most would live their entire lives without ever glimpsing its existence. But something had gone wrong. A flaw in the system, a breach in the design. Somewhere, somehow, someone had disturbed the foundation they had spent lifetimes fortifying. And it all led to you. Maybe you never meant to see it. Maybe you weren't looking. But you did, and they know it. You weren't supposed to understand what you saw, to piece together what was never meant to be connected. And yet here you are, still standing, still watching, still knowing. And that terrifies them. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling the reality became. Some of these passages had once served a purpose. Forgotten networks abandoned by time, remnants of projects left unfinished. But others were different. They were recent, they were intentional, and they were occupied. This was no mere hideaway for criminals or relic of a forgotten past. What thrived below was something ancient, something with roots far deeper than any single moment in history. A faction, unseen and untouched, moving through the underground with a precision that spoke of power, of influence, of protection from above. Their existence was not a rumor, not the imagination of conspiracy. This was something orchestrated, something hidden in plain sight. There was no denying the reach of those who protected it. These were not wanderers or drifters seeking refuge in darkness. They were interwoven with the very structures that governed society, figures who stood in boardrooms, who made decisions behind closed doors, who ensured the system never turned its gaze too closely. But no secret is eternal. The agent unearthed more than they were meant to. Records surfaced, ledgers, correspondences, coded instructions. The names attached were not obscure, they were influential. And when exposure threatened their control, the response was swift. Evidence erased, structures burned, accidents arranged with careful precision. But this time, their escape was not assured. Their well-planned exit, their carefully crafted path to vanish as they always had, failed. A last route, a final retreat, had been severed before they could use it. The underground became their prison, the very network they had used to remain untouchable becoming their downfall. There was no way out, and that was no accident. The precision, the timing, it was too calculated to be chance. Someone had intervened, someone they had never prepared for, someone outside their intricate web of control. And that made them afraid. For the first time, they had to ask a question they had never considered. Who had done this? And as their grip on secrecy unraveled, all their attention turned to one place. To the one anomaly they had overlooked. To the one presence that had not been accounted for. Now, they were searching for answers, and they were searching for you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. There is something about truth they have always feared. It moves like fire through dry fields, unstoppable once ignited. You don't need to force it. You don't need permission to spread it. Once it's seen, once it's spoken, it cannot be unspoken. That's why they spent lifetimes trying to control it. That's why they built entire systems just to keep it buried. For generations, they have sat at the top, weaving their reality, carefully ensuring that only what they approve reaches the world. They crafted history to fit their will, dictated what was known and what was erased. Their influence stretched across nations, embedded within governments, finance, media, every pillar of civilization molded to serve them. And for the longest time, it worked. But there's always a crack in the foundation. They never expected something to slip through. They never thought a single voice, a single moment, could set off a chain reaction they could no longer contain. And yet, here you are. You weren't supposed to know what you know. You weren't supposed to see what you've seen. They had a plan, a script, a controlled narrative, and you didn't fit into it. Your questions were never supposed to be asked. Your voice was never supposed to rise above the static they created to keep people blind. So they tried their usual tactics. They ridiculed, they silenced, they labeled. Conspiracy, misinformation, dangerous. The same words, the same weapons, recycled again and again, meant to shut down anything they couldn't control. But this time, it didn't work, because your words stuck. People listened, maybe not everyone, not all at once, but enough. Enough to make them uncomfortable, enough to make them desperate. And that's when you know they're afraid. See, when deception is working, when their machine is running smoothly, they don't care, they don't bother to respond, they don't even acknowledge voices like yours. But the moment they start fighting back, the moment they start shutting you down, that's when you know you're over the target. Because truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. You've done something they never accounted for. You didn't just speak, you made people think. You made them look at the cracks in the story, at the inconsistencies, at the things they were never meant to notice. And now it's too late for them. They can try to suppress it. They can try to silence it. But truth moves like wildfire. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It just spreads. At first, they treated it as an anomaly, a minor inconvenience to be neutralized with the usual methods. The machinery of suppression activated, labels were assigned, dismissive rhetoric was deployed, mechanisms designed to discredit and contain. Debunking articles flooded every corner of the digital space. Algorithms shifted visibility, ensuring your words reached only those already inclined to ignore them. The standard playbook, executed flawlessly. But then something happened. Your words didn't fade into obscurity. They spread. They resonated. People didn't just hear, they examined, cross-referenced, uncovered fragments that aligned too perfectly to be ignored. It wasn't just theory anymore, it was a blueprint to something hidden in plain sight. That was when they escalated. When simple misdirection failed, more forceful deterrents were introduced. Financial instability struck out of nowhere. Frozen assets, inexplicable debts, sudden complications in every avenue of life. Social circles fractured, relationships strained. Invisible hands pulling strings just enough to isolate, but not enough to reveal the puppeteers. And then came the shadows, figures lingering on the periphery, vehicles stationed in places they didn't belong, moments where strangers seemed to know too much. The shift from passive to active was gradual, deliberate. First, veiled warnings, a misdelivered message, a subtle threat slipped into a conversation. Then, the warnings became unmistakable. A near collision with an out-of-control vehicle that had no reason to be there. An inexplicable failure in a safety system, something meant to be foolproof. A sudden affliction, an illness too rapid, too targeted to be coincidence. Every step designed to ensure silence. But silence never came. Every carefully laid plan unraveled before it could be completed. Every attempt to erase you met an unseen resistance. It was a failure they could not comprehend. Probability dictated you should not have lasted this long, that the sequence of events should have erased you before the truth took root. And yet here you stood, an anomaly in their controlled equation. It was beyond calculation, beyond influence. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was something else entirely, something they had never accounted for. And that terrified them. For generations, they believed their authority was absolute. They controlled narratives, dictated outcomes, reshaped history to fit their will. Every threat had been neutralized before it could manifest, every deviation swiftly crushed. But they overlooked something, an unseen force moving beyond their calculations. No matter how meticulously they orchestrated events, there were gaps, fractures in their design that defied explanation. Every failed scheme, every unraveling plan, every escape that should have been impossible, yet occurred. They weren't coincidences. There was something watching, something intervening in ways they could neither predict nor prevent. There were signs, ancient, buried beneath layers of forgotten knowledge, disregarded as meaningless remnants of civilizations long past. But those who gazed upon them knew better. They weren't random, they weren't decoration, they were warnings, echoes of a truth that refused to be erased. And then, it happened. Something awakened. The agent hadn't been searching for answers in forgotten symbols, yet the moment their eyes traced those carved lines, something shifted inside them. It wasn't knowledge passed down through training or learned through experience. It was recognition, something buried deep within, surfacing as if it had always been waiting to be remembered. It was never just about control, about conspiracies or corruption. The entire game had been designed to obscure something far greater. For so long, the agent had relied on logic, on rules, on the structure that shaped their reality. Now, they stood at the precipice of something beyond comprehension, a struggle that extended beyond institutions, beyond power, beyond anything they had been conditioned to accept as truth. The battle wasn't of flesh and blood. It wasn't confined to politics or intelligence wars. This was something else entirely. And you, knowingly or not, had glimpsed the depths of it. There was no retreat from what had been unveiled. Some forces couldn't be bribed, threatened, or coerced. There were debts that couldn't be repaid with influence or wealth, consequences woven into existence itself. The ones who thought they had mastered deception were now realizing the weight of what they had unleashed. Their empire of secrecy was collapsing, and the darkness they had wielded for so long had turned against them. Those who once stood at the peak of untouchable power were now vanishing, disappearing not by choice, but by necessity. They weren't fleeing justice, they were running from something far worse. And for the first time, they understood what true fear was. The ones who once dictated reality now find themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Their influence, once absolute, now crumbles under a force they neither understand nor control. The figures who once operated with unwavering confidence are unraveling, rational minds spiraling into chaos, carefully maintained facades shattering under the weight of unseen pressures. Those who remain exist in a state of unrelenting fear. The very forces they once commanded have turned against them, relentless and insatiable. The whispers that once granted them power now torment them from within. The horrors they once inflicted upon others now stalk them in the silence of the night. No refuge, no escape, because this was never just about control. This was never just a game of wealth, influence, or strategy. It was something far beyond their comprehension. They scoffed at the idea of unseen forces, dismissed faith as weakness, weaponized belief against others while claiming immunity from its consequences. They were convinced they could defy consequence itself, bend reality to their will, rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. But reality does not yield to arrogance. The agent, once ruled by skepticism, now stands face to face with an undeniable truth, because they have witnessed events that defy all reason. Something is happening. The symbols hidden in the depths, the inexplicable failures of every silencing attempt, the way their once mighty network collapses from within, none of it is random. This is not mere misfortune. It is something deliberate, something inescapable. The agent cannot explain it, but they no longer need to. They have seen what happens to those who sought to control the uncontrollable. The very people who once stood untouchable now whisper in fear, their certainty eroded, their empire in ruins. There is a name they dare not speak, an entity they curse in the shadows, a presence they blame for their undoing. They see it as the force that shattered the foundation they spent lifetimes building. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. This was always inevitable. Their downfall was written long before they ever took power. The force they fought so desperately to suppress was never something they could defeat. And now, the consequences of their deception have arrived in full. There are moments in existence when the veil is torn away, when illusions collapse, when the undeniable truth leaves no room for doubt. The agent has reached that moment. They had spent their life carrying out orders, believing in a system they thought was righteous, protecting those who never deserved their loyalty. They thought they were serving something greater. Now they understand the truth. They were never protectors. They were pawns. And it was only through a force beyond comprehension that they were able to see what had been hidden all along. It wasn't an intelligence leak or a well-placed informant that led them here. It was something unexpected, something that at first seemed inconsequential. A voice, a message, a thread they had no reason to follow. They had encountered countless theories before, countless individuals claiming to have the missing piece to an unseen puzzle. But this time, something was different. The way the words lingered, the way they fit into spaces where no answer had ever belonged. It kept pulling them back. What should have been just another forgettable noise in an ocean of speculation became something they couldn't ignore. At first, their instinct was dismissal. It was easy to assume that it was all coincidence, that the connections were imagined, that the conclusions drawn were reaching too far. But then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A name in a forgotten report, a discrepancy in a sealed case file, a connection that shouldn't have existed but undeniably did. So they kept going, and the deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. The world they had trusted was an illusion. The facts they had built their career on had been sculpted with precision, not to inform, but to mislead. What had once seemed like isolated occurrences were strands of a carefully woven deception, stretching far beyond what they had ever imagined. The walls they had once relied on were not walls at all. They were cages, keeping the truth locked away while they operated under the illusion of knowledge. Those they had worked alongside were not allies, but architects of a grander scheme. And somehow, despite having no clearance, no inside access, no reason to be trusted, this lone voice had found the fractures in the foundation. They weren't right about everything, not always in the way they had expected, but they had seen the shape of something vast and insidious long before anyone else had. And because of that, something irreversible had happened. The agent was no longer a cog in the machine. They had been given a choice, a door that had never existed before, and now that it was open, there was no going back. This was never just about hidden deals or unseen hands pulling the strings. This was about something far greater, something beyond corruption or crime. It was about waking up. The battles that played out in boardrooms and underground networks were just a reflection of something deeper, something that moved unseen through the world, shifting the course of history without most ever realizing. There were forces at work that no intelligence briefing would ever acknowledge, forces that shaped destiny itself. And without knowing it, without even realizing the scale of what was happening, that voice had been fighting against them all along. The agent understands now. The ones they once hunted, the ones they once dismissed, were never the real enemy. The real battle had always been something else, something ancient, something waged in silence across generations. And now, for the first time, they see with clarity. The voice they had once ignored is no longer just a whisper in the dark. It is an ally. It is something they will no longer turn away from, because now they know. Those who sought to erase it have already lost. The ones who once dictated reality from the shadows are witnessing the crumbling of their dominion. The carefully guarded veil is lifting, their grip loosening with every passing moment. Those who believed themselves beyond consequence, who thrived in secrecy and wove deception into the very fabric of society, now find themselves exposed. Their pathways to escape are vanishing, their influence eroding beneath the weight of their own corruption. The world is shifting, and for those who built their thrones on lies, there is no refuge left. To those who spent lifetimes twisting truth to serve their will, this is your reckoning. The illusion is breaking, and control no longer belongs to you. The hour of true justice has arrived, not in the courts they once controlled, not in the institutions they infiltrated, but from something far greater, something they were never prepared to face. They gambled with forces beyond their comprehension, convinced they could outmaneuver fate itself. But there are debts in this world that cannot be bought, cannot be bargained away, cannot be erased with power or influence. The balance is being restored, and for the first time, they are no longer the ones dictating the outcome. And to the one who has stood against them, the message is clear. Continue. Do not falter. Do not waver. Do not retreat. Every word spoken, every deception unraveled, every revelation brought into the light has shifted the course of history in ways they never foresaw. They sought to silence, to erase, to crush beneath the weight of fear and disinformation. And yet here you stand, still speaking, still revealing, still dismantling the very foundation they swore was unshakable. You are not alone. Those who see, those who know, those who refuse to kneel to the weight of manufactured lies are rising. The silence they once enforced has been shattered, and now the voices of those awakened will not be stilled. To those who recognize the truth, speak. Let the world feel your presence. Let the weight of what was hidden be exposed for all to see. Stand together. The time of deception is over.